For those who don't know me, I'm Dory Zalesnik. I'm the Chief Administrative Officer in the city, working with the mayor. And I'm delighted on his behalf to present this award to two distinguished residents of Newton, who we are pleased to acknowledge with this Human Rights Award. Just for a moment to build on what the mayor was saying, in addition to honoring the Carringtons and incredibly distinguished careers for both, we have 4 students who are just beginning, but nevertheless making significant contributions to their school communities and our community at large. And we are facing a particularly difficult time in this country with Ferguson and Staten Island, and hopefully the beginning of a much more constructive dialogue around race, diversity, respecting our differences. Our school kids have a terrific curriculum starting in elementary school of understanding our differences. And I think it's really time for the adults in this community to follow in that tradition and begin a good discussion of how we can all celebrate what everybody has to offer and live together peacefully, respectfully, etc. So it is my great pleasure on behalf of the Human Rights Commission and the mayor to present this plaque to Arisa and Walter Carrington.
And not to be outdone, we have, if you can just, wait, we're not done with you yet. We have not 1 but 2 citations from both sides of the State House. Representative Ruth Balsa, she's here. There she is.
So I just want to add my congratulations, first of all, to the Human Rights Commission for this brilliant choice of awardees, and and just to thank the Carringtons for all that they've done and for inspiring us and all of us, and how proud I am of our community, and so grateful that you're part of it and you represent the best in our community that stands for social justice and human rights. And I'm really here to congratulate you, not only from myself as your representative, but from the entire House of Representatives. And just very quickly, I want to read the citation that be it hereby known to all that the Massachusetts House of Representatives offers its sincerest congratulations to Ambassador Walter and Dr. Arisa Carrington in recognition of your lifelong work as advocates for human rights in our community and around the world. And it's signed by Speaker of the House, Robert DeLeo, and your favorite state representative, Ruth Balzer.
And we're not done because there's also a Senate side. Oh, I'm sorry. We.
Of course.
Oh, wait, we have to do it the other way.
There we go. Thank you.
We have a Senate citation too. Senator Cream couldn't come here, but there's someone from her office.
This feels like Christmas before Christmas Day.
Prelude to Christmas.
Thank you. My name is Lisa Sears, and I'm here on behalf of Senator Cream, who was unable to be here today. But she'd like to give you this citation on behalf of the Massachusetts Senate, and congratulations of receiving the award tonight. You're welcome.
Well, now that we've heard a little bit about the accomplishments of Walter and Aracy, it's my pleasure to call on Aracy first to say a few words in accepting the award.
Good evening, everyone. I am truly overwhelmed, and I want to thank you all for being here today. First of all, let me thank Richard Golub for his kind words. Wow, it's nice working with you. And I'd like to thank Representative Ruth Balsa especially. Thank you for being here. I know your program, you're always so busy, and I know that this is an important issue to you, and that's why you're here. Thank you. And also, Senator Cream, for sending a representative this evening. Thank you for being here. I am also very grateful to the City of Newton for this Human Rights Award. When we were coming back from Nigeria, back here to Massachusetts, Walter said, what part of Massachusetts do you want to live in? And I didn't know much about Massachusetts, but something about Newton appealed to me. And I said, let's settle in Newton. And so we found ourselves here in Newton. And I must say that I have not been disappointed. It's a wonderful city to be in. I also want to congratulate all the other recipients tonight. And I think that all of you should also realize that your award, even though you're just starting, is very important. And I'm glad that at your young age, you realize the importance of social justice and human rights. I also feel very honored to be receiving this award with my husband. And for the students, I look at you, you are our future, and you are a symbol that there is hope for the world we live in today. I remember coming to the Newton Free Library while I was writing my recently finished memoirs on my experience as a child during the Nigerian Civil War. Thank you for plugging my book for me. It was during that war that my father, while fleeing the rebels, gave me a mantra that has guided my life and is probably the reason I am standing before you this evening. He said to me, "You must defend the defenseless." Although I was 9 years old, I have never forgotten his words, and they have guided the choices I have made in life. From studying medicine instead of going to Hollywood, as you heard, although I'm sure Hollywood would have paid much better, to public health, to fighting for democracy and human rights in Nigeria, to my involvement in organizations defending a cause that promotes social justice and protects people's human rights, especially children and women's rights. 66 years ago today, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was proclaimed and adopted by the General Assembly. All human beings are born with equal and inalienable rights and fundamental freedoms. Human rights are universal for every human being, regardless of their color, race, age, religion, or sexuality. They are meant to protect individuals on matters such as safety and security, food and shelter, healthcare, education, religion, freedom of speech, social issues. Basically, these rights are meant to help an individual attain their maximum potential economically, socially, and politically. They are our rights, so we must endeavor to protect and stand up for them, because in doing so, we ensure that one day we do not become victims of human rights abuses. As the world continues to try to deal with extremism and terrorism, there's a direct correlation that can be made between extremism, terrorism, and human rights. Extremism can lead to terrorism, which then impacts human rights. And when human rights are impacted, it could lead to terrorism. Thus, a vicious cycle is born. Extremism, whether religious or political, advocates or supports extreme doctrines that are usually way outside the mainstream. Extremism of ideology can lead to terrorism, especially where fanatics are involved. They are pious in their ways and believe everyone else must conform, and they use terror as a means. They believe the end justifies their means. The video picture of some of the over 200 abducted Chibok girls showed them in hijabs. Some of these girls were not Muslims, but they were coerced to become Muslims. No matter what religion, conversion cannot be done under terror. Their freedom of religious choice was taken from them. Some, according to the video, have been sold off as slaves and married off. The impact of terrorism on human rights is wide. It has an impact on individuals and on governments. Terrorism is the systemic use of explicit actions that terrorize individuals, communities, or countries to intimidate or coerce them for political or religious purposes. Acts of terrorism tend to destabilize governments and make it difficult for them to perform their state duties of protecting the human rights of their citizens. Terrorists have no respect for the rule of law or human rights. They take away people's freedoms and sometimes right to life. Over 10,000 people have lost their lives in Nigeria, directly or indirectly, due to the Boko Haram terror reign this year so far. The Security Council of the United Nations, the General Assembly, the former Commission on Human Rights, and the new Human Rights Council deliberate on the destructive aspects of terrorism and continue to put out resolutions relating to the act of terrorism. Terrorists set up chain reactions of fear, whereby everyone is on edge and suspicious of certain groups of people. People then begin to take the law into their hands, and jungle justice takes place on suspected perpetrators in some countries. Trying to counter terrorism and at the same time adhere to the rule of law and human rights is a delicate balance. As we all know, the CIA torture report that has just been released is being widely debated right now. These are difficult times where we need to take a step back as a nation and ask ourselves, who are we as a nation and what are our core principles? Do we want to become like the terrorists, who we say are the bad ones? United Nations Global Counterterrorism Strategy states, the promotion and protection of human rights for all and the rule of law is essential to all components of the strategy, recognizing that effective counterterrorism measures and the promotion of human rights are not conflicting goals, but complementary and mutually reinforcing. In patriarchal societies, or societies where cultural and religious beliefs trump human rights, women and girls are often forgotten in the shadows and suffer the most. And this is an area that has been of a lot of interest to me, because having come from a society that's relatively patriarchal, although I can say things are improving, you see that women are not allowed to harness their potential. Their dreams and ambitions to become doctors, lawyers, teachers, and other professions that will lift them out of poverty, give them a life of dignity and self-reliance, is often denied them. They are told to live a life of submission where the man reigns supreme. They are often subjected to acts of violence. As you can see, the hashtag Bring Back Our Girls, sadly, are still missing and depressing to say, almost forgotten. Those are our lost daughters, the Chibok girls. Since then, several other females have been abducted, and even 20 girls were kidnapped from a village in Nigeria 2 days ago. Several female suicide bombers are now being used by Boko Haram terrorists to carry out their heinous acts. Even today, there was a case of a female suicide bomber in a major market in Kano City in northern Nigeria. Who are these poor innocent girls that are being coerced to carry out these acts? December 19, 2011, the United Nations General Assembly declared October 11th as the International Day of the Girl Child to recognize girls' rights and the unique challenges girls face around the world. Investing in the girl-child education results in better health care, increased income generation, economic growth and development, which in turn promotes stability, peace and security, and strengthening of civil society and democracy. Therefore, we cannot relent in our efforts to ensure that every child, especially the girl child, has a right to an education in a safe and happy environment. Gordon Brown, the UN Special Envoy for Global Education, launched the Safe School Initiative in Nigeria at the last World Economic Forum on Africa. The political will to facilitate changes in the lives of girls and women in Africa has been slow. In my native Nigeria, for example, data still suggests that the impact of national gender policies are still not being felt. A few examples from a UK government's 2002 study on gender issues states that every day 144 Nigerian women die in childbirth, which is equivalent to one death every 10 minutes. Nigeria ranks 118 of 134 countries in the Gender Equality Index. At every educational level, women earn less than their male counterparts, and in some situations, men with less education earn more than better educated female peers. Well, even in America, we only just implemented the Equal Pay Act, so you can imagine we have a long way to go all over the world. The statistics for females in many other social areas are equally woeful and need to be addressed. Human rights are women's rights, and gender disparity deny women of their rights. We continue to have overwhelming crises that affect human rights, from religious conflicts to pandemics, war, poverty, famine, pollution, global warming. These are just only some of the crises the world finds itself in today. In these challenging times, we need to challenge ourselves. In a war, there are no victors. As nations, we must learn to share in each other's triumphs and tragedies. We must remain united, knowing that our strength lies not only in our similarities, but also in our differences. Failing to address the deep-rooted causes that led to the war is like putting a temporary cap on a bottle that can be opened at a later date. No matter how daunting the challenges are, we must strive for local, regional, and global peace. Nations must learn to sit down and try to resolve conflicts using various platforms available to them, especially the United Nations. When the handwriting is on the wall and we can see a conflict pending, we should go into a prevention mode rather than wait for the fighting to start. Waging war to attain peace seems to me like an oxymoron. The casualties and impact a war has lingers way into the future. I have seen war and peace, and I know the bitter memory of war is difficult to erase, but the sweet memory of peace is easy to embrace. Learning to see those different from us as allies and not threats goes a long way in building coalitions. Again and again, we say never again. whenever there are humanitarian crises and human rights abuses. But yet, the world finds itself in the same predicament again. Why is this? We need to keep asking ourselves. The world has everything to lose when some are left with nothing to lose. The crisis of world poverty cannot be underscored and needs to be addressed urgently. Data from UNICEF states that 22,000 children die each day due to poverty. Those that survive are faced with unique challenges, including exploitation. It is easy to ponder what future the world holds, yet it is easier for us to discount future gains. The contradictions of us wanting a more secure, better world and our continued discounting of future gains can clearly be seen in how long it has taken the world to do something about climate change and its negative effects. Climate change impacts food security and shelter, which are part of our basic human rights. It has to be a part of the poverty alleviation discussion. In an interdependent global world, no nation or territory can isolate itself. We should all act on behalf of one another for the sake of humanity to ensure we live in a conducive world, not just for some, but for all. Peace, security, and basic human rights should not elude the majority of people while enjoyed by others. An activist cares passionately enough to act. As many of you here are doing already, especially you young students today that are being honored, we must care enough to continue to act. It is our moral duty. And as my father told me so many years ago, I say to everyone here, including myself today, we must defend the defenseless. Thank you very much.
And finally, Walter Carrington.
Thank you, Peter. Senator Cream, distinguished guests, friends, supporters of human rights, it is a great pleasure for me and for RSA to be here tonight. I must thank my good friend, Ambassador Hull, for the very kind words he had to say. And he mentioned the fact that RSA and I met in Nigeria right after my arrival, actually 2 weeks after my arrival. When you're a new ambassador in a country, you're really a non-person until you present your credentials. You're not supposed to go out to any public events or make any comments. Well, my first public event when I was released was the Belgian National Day, and that's where I met RSA. You know, all my life I have thought about the fact of how many of my fellow African Americans have gone to Africa in search of their roots. I went to Nigeria and found my destiny. RSA and I are deeply honored by the award you have this night bestowed upon us. There could not be a better setting in which to celebrate human rights than one in which you are not only highlighting past achievements, but more importantly, serving as enablers to a new generation of young people in whose DNA human rights is more deeply embedded than it has been in any that have gone before them. The older brothers of my age group have been memorialized by some as the greatest generation for their service in the Second World War, which the United States entered when I was 11 years old. They fought valiantly for democracy abroad, but alas, not at home. Although it was a war for democracy and against Nazi racism, it was fought with a racially segregated army. The belief that blacks should not serve together with whites was one which I regret to say was supported by an overwhelming majority of that so-called greatest generation. My own candidate, by the way, for the greatest would be the generation of the 1960s. They were not conscripts, but volunteers fighting nonviolently for the cause of racial equality and later for gender equity. Their battles were fought half a century ago. They laid the foundation for the world we live in today, one so fundamentally different from the one I grew up in the 1930s and 40s. I lived then in Everett, a city of 50,000, which a National Urban League report found at the time to be one of the most racially integrated cities of its size. Black families were scattered throughout the city. There was no West Newton there. My boyhood was lived in a predominantly Italian and Irish area. I learned to curse proficiently in Italian with a Sicilian accent and hand gestures, even before mastering the expletives of the less flamboyant Anglo-Saxon version of profanity. I was recently asked if, as a kid growing up in Everett, I could ever have dreamed that one day I would live in a country with a black president, in a state with a black governor, and in a city with a black mayor. Now, if truth be told, I was an idealistic, rather self-confident kid who, because of the leadership positions I held in a nearly all-white high school, believed in the American dream and that I might myself one day rise to one of those heights, at least at the state level. I was not at all surprised, therefore, when serving with the Peace Corps in Africa, I learned that my mentor and friend, Ed Brooke, had been elected to the United States Senate, the first black since Reconstruction. Now, my generation came to age in a generation of firsts, which, whenever they occurred, were heralded in the pages of black magazines like Ebony and Jet, and black newspapers near and far like the Boston Chronicle and the Pittsburgh Courier. My grandmother and her two sisters moved north from Sumter, South Carolina in the 1920s. In the poetically ironic title of Isabel Wilkerson's groundbreaking book, they came in search of the warmth of other suns. My grandmother's quest led her to Everett, her sisters to Winchester and Newton. How often as a child I visited my Aunt Hattie and my cousins in a West Newton community which no longer exists, a cruel sacrificial victim to a program of urban renewal designed to appease the gods of the Mass Turnpike. My other visits to Newton in those days long ago occurred on those rare, exciting occasions when my sister Marilyn and I would accompany my grandmother, in whose home we were raised, to what, to our childish eyes, was a mansion located in the toniest section of this fair city. There we would play in the garden, while inside she carried out her duties as a maid. That red-bricked estate remains seared in my memory still. Years later, while working with the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination, I began to know Newton a lot better. This city established one of the first and most active fair housing committees in the Commonwealth. They were an essential arm to the Commission's effort to eliminate the state's worst stain of racism, housing segregation. It was an evil which often was more pervasive above the notorious Mason-Dixon line than below it. There was an old saying that in the South, white folks were less concerned about how close blacks were than how high they might rise. In the North, they cared less about how high you rose as long as you didn't get too close. They were far more likely to vote for black candidates than to let them live in their neighborhood. I learned this lesson up close and personal soon after I was appointed to the commission. I found an apartment I liked in the Harvard Square section of Cambridge, only to be told when I showed up that it was no longer available. I asked the realtor to let me know when other units became vacant in the building. As I left, I handed him my card with the Massachusetts state logo in the corner and my title of commissioner of the MCAD under my name. Surprise, surprise. I got a call the next day informing me that the apartment was indeed available and apologizing for the mistake. That incident only spurred my determination to energetically enforce the fair housing law to assure that all who were denied housing because of their color found adequate redress. A half-century later, while we have made great strides in eliminating discrimination, there remains much to be done. Returning to that question of what I dreamed of as a boy about the future of race relations, let me state what I did not dream. When I first marched as a teenager more than 60 years ago, I never could have imagined then that I might have to do it yet again, this time as an octogenarian. The last few weeks have reminded us that no matter how far we have come, there is still a distance to go. The tragedies of Ferguson, Staten Island, and too many other towns in our beloved land are painful reminders of that reality. As an American envoy in Nigeria, I often admonished the military dictatorship there for following practices which we could never condone back home in my country. I often said then that when agents of the government abuse their authority, they are brought to book. There is no impunity for those who, under the color of law, violate the very laws they are sworn to uphold. As a black father, I despaired that the talk I gave to my then teenage son, he might have to give to my grandson. It is not the talk about the birds and the bees, which all of us, black and white, must awkwardly impart to our children. No, it is one which dads of color are unfortunately still burdened with. In addition to being careful about the company our sons keep on their weekend nights, they must be especially careful about any law enforcement officers they might encounter. And with how much more urgency must today's parents of teenagers impart that message in the light of the young man who, probably remembering his father's message, his father's injunction, followed the orders of a policeman who had stopped him, and while reaching for his license, was shot dead in the act of doing so. Or the young man who had picked up a toy gun in a store and while examining it was killed with a shot from a real one. Or more inexplicable of all, the 12-year-old who was doing what all of us males have done as kids, playing with a toy gun in a park, only to be shot by a rookie officer less than 2 seconds after his squad car arrived on the scene. Now, from everything I have observed and experienced, the rest of the country could learn much from the workings of the Newton Police Department. Now, I've been stopped twice, both because of my failure to obey a stop sign before making a right turn, and once for a burned-out taillight. In each instance, I was treated with the utmost courtesy. In all 3 episodes, I received no more than a warning. Now, while there may be others who have had a different experience, compared with what I have seen around the country, any unprofessionalism among our own men in blue is an aberration rather than a sign of business as usual. It is so uplifting to see so many young white people participating in the peaceful demonstrations around the country. They are a testament to the observation made by the usually caustic comedian Chris Rock, who in an interview recently said, "The advantage that my children have is that they are encountering the nicest white people that America has ever produced." Now, to the extent that that generation is represented by the high school students here tonight, they prove that statement true, to that extent will you and your generation have helped to save our country and the ideals we have so long cherished and just as long failed to live up to. And so, Mathina, Nuria, Sadiq, and Najia, we look forward to the work you are to do in the future, as well as paying honor to the work and ideals you have shown in the past. Take up the torch for human rights, which those who have gone before you have tried to keep alight as a beacon of hope in a conflict-riven world. Thank you.